California is in the midst of an historic drought. We are also in the midst of an election year. And few things are more politically divisive in California than water. Who gets it, who pays for it, where and how it is captured and transported have proven to be political minefields for nearly a century. Is this the right time to forge a consensus that addresses the water needs of all Californians? We'll ask UC Professor Richard Howitt, Jonas Mitten, the Senior Water Policy Advisor with the Planning and Conservation League, Janine Jones, the state's Deputy Drought Manager and a 30-year veteran of the Department of Water Resources, and Dan Morain, the editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee. The drought, will it change California's political climate?
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From Fresno, the Maddy Report, with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Regardless of your politics, everyone seems to agree that California agriculture is going to be significantly impacted by the current drought. Our guest is Richard Howitt, a UC professor of agriculture and resource economics and an expert in how water and farming kind of come together. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, Central Valley agriculture is obviously going to be impacted by water exports from the Delta, but how much and how so?
Well, essentially, we get about a third of our Central Valley water through the Delta, around about 4.3 million acre feet. And this is from the state and federal projects combined, and at the moment, they're projecting 0 levels of delivery. This is something that's never happened before. And so we're going to see a significant cut, even with groundwater increasing, of around 25% of the supplies of water to the valley.
Well, so there's going to be, well, there's either going to be more rain that's going to help fix the situation, probably not, or, as you're saying, there's going to be more groundwater pumping. But is the aquifer, can it handle that?
Well, historically, we've always increased our groundwater pumping in droughts, and generally by about 50%. But in the Central Valley, the quantity of groundwater pumped in a normal year is about the same as the exports. So you're talking about 4.3 million acre feet, which means that you might be able to make up half of the shortage, but you can't make it all up. And then the second question is we have to worry about subsidence and problems with our aquifers.
So then what? I mean, what happens? They just follow the land? They just take out the trees or what?
Yes, in 2009, when we had an 11% cut, remember this is about half of what we're expecting this year, we took out 285,000 acres and we lost about 10,000 jobs. Now, based on that, and based on the current situation, you could probably double both of those figures. And so we're looking at 500,000 acres fallowed and perhaps up to 20,000 jobs lost.
Wow. Some people say that there's been a lot of acreage in the Central Valley that's been converted from row crops to orchards like almonds, pistachios, things of that nature. Are orchards more water intensive?
Yes, they are. They use, well, compared with field crops such as cotton, they use about a third more.
So is that a good idea then to plant crops when you're not sure of the water that you're going to receive?
Well, yes, it's a good idea provided you're aware of what your water supplies are. And so it's like an investment portfolio that they pay off well. California is the leading producer of these crops, and there's tremendous demand for our fruits and nuts because of the quality and mostly the quality and the reliability. And so, but a lot of those crops are being produced on the west side of the valley and in Kern County, where they rely on state and federal water deliveries, which, as we see this year, are probably the weakest form of water rights there is in the valley.
But wouldn't farmers argue, listen, we've become much more efficient with our irrigation systems than we have in the past?
Well, they have. There's no question about that. But you can't get away from the basic fact that if you're going to grow a crop, you've got to evapotranspire, i.e. the plant has got to give off water. And that's the water that's really used. And that's the extra water that's used on trees.
Are you saying that we've overextended ourselves on surface water?
I don't think so. But I think we have to be very conscious from now on that we're going into a riskier water supply climate.
So what would you recommend going forward to ensure a sustainable agricultural economy given our available supply of water?
The chief thing is to use our groundwater reserves as reserves. At the minute, We don't have groundwater management in many places. Almost it's totally absent in the valley. If we took a look at Orange County, for instance, who have a very well managed, I'm talking about not regulated, but managed groundwater system, we can learn a lot. And if we're lucky, this drought will lead local decision makers in the valley to realize that the value of the groundwater is as a reserve in the water bank account.
It's literally referred to as water banking.
Yes.
And so what we do is we fill up the aquifers in the wet years, and so in these drought years, there's water there to use. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's also managing the natural recharge to the aquifers, because basically at the minute it's first come, first served in pumping.
Do I even ask you the question about above ground storage and dams? What about that? What are your thoughts on that briefly?
My thoughts are that this is fairly expensive. We could probably justify an above ground dam south of the delta, because the delta is going to be a real blockage in moving water through it.
Well, I want to thank Professor Howitt from UC Davis for being our guest. Up next, what is the environmental community's response to California's water crisis? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. Farmers and environmentalists are often at odds regarding the best way to address California's water needs. What are the concerns of environmentalists, and what are their solutions to California's current drought and long-term water challenges? Our guest is Jonas Mitten, Senior Water Policy Advisor with the Planning and Conservation League. Welcome back to the Maddy Report, Jonas.
Great to be here, man.
So, what are the implications for the drought on the Delta?
Well, it's important to recognize that this is not a so-called regulatory drought. This is not one caused by some provisions to protect small fish or even water quality. Last week, those were waived by the state regulators almost entirely. And the reason is the water just isn't there. So not only within the Delta are we seeing these impacts, but here in Sacramento, water users as many as over 100,000 may see the water intake for their water district actually go out of the water, or the water sinks beneath it. Fishing people have on their own requested the state to ban fishing in many streams in California to protect the few remaining stocks. So it is that important.
Well, what about the groundwater issues and California's aquifers? How is the drought going to impact those things?
Well, we've all seen the pictures of the reservoirs being drawn lower and lower and lower. And we see the reports of the people out doing the snow surveys and able to walk out onto the fields.
I think I saw 12% of snowpack, and that's dramatically down from past levels. Like 21%, I think, was the lowest in the past, so it's a big drop.
This is the lowest in our recorded history. It may not be the lowest that California has experienced. There have been much larger and longer droughts. So we can see that, but groundwater is the insidious menace we cannot see. Each year, even without a drought, as much as 2 million acre-feet of water are withdrawn from underground and not replenished. That's enough for over 500,000 acres of agriculture. Now, in some cases, farmers themselves, and farmers do most of the pumping, farmers themselves have looked and said, this is not sustainable. We need to get together and identify how much can be pumped safely over time.
Okay, what about, when we talk about farmers, what about the idea of paying farmers to fallow land so they don't pump so much groundwater?
Well, this is where an economic reality comes into place and what drove this. Just a little story. My friend from high school, Donnie, was a great backhoe operator. And one time he got a big bonus check, worked a lot of overtime, put a down payment on a top-of-the-line F-350. Well, sometimes the work didn't come in, and he had trouble making his payments. So he called on friends and family. But after a while, even they ran out of resources. What happened? He doesn't have the truck. What's happened with agriculture on this issue in pumping? Farmers elected voluntarily, no one controls them, to plant hundreds of thousands of acres of permanent crops. Crops that need water not only in the wet years, but in the dry years. And now we're in this dry year. And it's not a matter of somebody telling them or paying them not to plant. The water isn't there. They roll the dice. In our capitalistic system, they are going to be suffering the consequences.
Well, you've been quoted as saying, quote, "We have clung to the notion that we do not live within our means," unquote. What do you mean by that?
In California, we've gone kind of the same way the state has done its budgeting for decades. When there's a lot of resource, be it tax money that comes in or water in a wet year, we spend it all. We deplete our reservoirs. We don't carry it over for the inevitable dry years. And we're finding what happens.
And whether they're talking about a rainy day fund for the budget, maybe there needs to be a rainy day fund for water.
We need a dry day fund for the water.
Well, there you go. Better way to say it. You've also been quoted as saying the question for California, the question California will have to address is, where do we invest the money? Do we invest the money in dams and pipelines, or do we invest the money in recycling, groundwater cleanup, and conservation technologies? I think I know what your answer is going to be, but what do you think the answer is to that question?
Well, the governor is proposing a big tunnel package of $67 billion, according to Westland's Water District's consultant.
Well, I've heard 25 billion
well,
for that project.
That's what the folks said. You remember high-speed rail and the initial estimates? This estimate I gave you came from the Westland's Water District, which is not known as necessarily a leading environmental organization. It's that expensive. About the same as high-speed rail, actually, but with fewer funding sources identified. So the question is, do we put money into that as collectively, because taxpayers would have to pay a significant part of that, and in a year like this, there would be zero water coming out of those tunnels, or do we spend it on water recycling, stormwater capture? It is raining today, and that water isn't being captured. Groundwater cleanup that provide water in the wet years and in a dry year like this.
Okay, well, I want to thank Jonas Mitten from the Planning and Conservation League for talking to us. Up next, we'll talk to the person tapped with leading the state's response to this year's drought. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. Our next guest is Janine Jones, who may have been given the biggest job in her 30-year career at the California Department of Water Resources, coordinating the state's response to the current drought. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Oh, thank you very much.
Busy person, no doubt. Well, Governor Brown has declared a drought emergency. What does that mean, and particularly what does that mean to the average Californian?
Well, to start, what it means is that we do really have a severe situation here. This is not just your ordinary drought. This is a severe drought. We're tying records for driest years on record in California back in the 1970s, back in the 1920s, so that's very significant, and the emergency proclamation reflects that fact. What it should really mean to the average Californian is, first of all, the governor called for conservation, really emphasizing the conservation message in that, because not only do we encourage the average person to embrace conservation as a way of life, we also need the conservation to help make it through this drought and to conserve critical storage resources, because this year's not looking good. What if next year's dry too?
Right. I've actually been reading some stuff where they've talked about in the history of time, California suffered some mega droughts that go on for hundreds of years. Let's hope we're not into one of those. You know, California agriculture uses a lot of water. What I've read is about 80% of the water used in California is used by California agriculture. So what effect is this going to have on the agricultural economy?
Well, at this stage, it's really too early to speculate, and you know, agriculture depends on national markets, global markets, and as water agencies, that's not really things that we're conversant with. What we can talk about is, how do the water supply conditions look across the board for agriculture? The good news is that a few parts of the state, the Imperial Valley and south end of the Coachella Valley, where they get Colorado River water, are getting full supplies. The Salinas Valley, another important agricultural area, is groundwater dependent. So there they can rely on groundwater, although of course over the long term there are impacts with sustained groundwater use in excess of recharge. The Central Valley is where the large hits are, and you know, the State Water Project had announced its latest update of allocations at 0%. The federal
Can't get any lower than that.
The Federal Central Valley Project will be announcing later this month, and they have been saying for some time now that 0 is probably a good number that people should expect for agriculture south of the Delta.
That's never happened before, has it?
Not for our system, no, and that reflects, think about it, this winter, in what should be the wettest part of our winter, Sacramento went more than 50 days with no rain. And that's just incredible. And what that means is that if it's not raining, you don't have runoff. If you don't have runoff, you don't have flow in streams, and therefore there's no water to allocate.
So you were talking about the fact that there's going to be no allocation from the State Water Project this year, potentially for farmers. So is that going to mean deeper wells being dug in the valley and taking more groundwater out? And is there a concern that we might overdraft our aquifers?
Well, historically we have much experience on droughts, since that groundwater use goes up during droughts because that is really the ace in the hole for people, and they increase their use of groundwater when surface water is short. So certainly for areas that have groundwater resources available, they will definitely be increasing pumping, which of course increases the cost of production for agriculture. And groundwater overdraft is a long-term management issue in California. It's one we're very concerned about. We know, for example, that the San Joaquin Valley, which is a very productive agricultural region, has been in long-term overdraft for quite some time.
What about the situation of smaller water systems in rural areas? What's the drought going to do there?
Well, we have lots of experience from past droughts about who's vulnerable and who's more resilient, and small water systems in rural areas tend to be vulnerable. They don't have large rate bases to be able to afford measures for reliability, and we have requirements in California law for urban water management planning, but they only apply to systems with 3,000 connections or more. And through that planning process, that's how communities identify their water conservation plans as well as their water shortage plans. Since those requirements don't apply to the smaller systems, many of them have not really engaged in that process.
So a pretty serious problem. I want to thank Janine Jones, Deputy Drought Manager for the State Department of Water Resources, for joining us. Up next, what are the implications of the drought for California politics? We'll speak with the editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee, Dan Morain, in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. So what is the state of water politics given the current drought? We're fortunate to be joined by Dan Morain, the editorial page editor of the Sacramento Bee, who's going to give us the political currents, as it were. Welcome back to the Maddy Report, Dan.
Great to be here, thanks.
There's lots of water proposals out there, but there's already a water bond ready to go. It was passed in 2009, it was supposed to be on the ballot in 2010, they pushed it back, it was supposed to be on 2012, pushed it back again. Why not just put the 2009 proposal on this year's ballot?
Well, politics. Politics, polling.
Politics and water? Really?
Politics and water, yes indeed. I've been told that the polling on this bond, the idea of going $11 billion into debt, or even $9 billion into debt is just impossible. They could spend $100 million, they being the supporters of this, in support of a ballot measure and still lose.
Wow.
So that's why.
And that's where it's been trending since 2009?
That's what I've been told. And the governor's going to be on the ballot in November. Why exactly would he want a bond measure on the ballot that he supports when he's been talking about fiscal responsibility?
Right.
This is more debt.
He wants a clean ballot, kind of like the Prop 30 situation a little while ago. But there are a lot of other proposals floating out there. The puns are very difficult to avoid in this area.
We'll forgive you.
But there's you got the 2009 proposal, you have a Democratic Assembly proposal, you have a Democratic Senate proposal, and you now have a Republican Senate proposal. So what are the basic differences? If you were to tell a voter, what do you see as the basic differences?
Well, what I see as the basic differences, again, gets back to politics, and I don't think that we should confuse motion for progress here. I don't really see much happening this year, although there certainly is there is a lot of motion. The Republicans this past week came out with a proposal. The Democrats, as you say, want a proposal. One of the big issues has to do with storage. Now, I think everybody is in accord that there has to be more storage.
Now, when you say storage, though, there's a difference between underground and above ground.
Sure.
So I think, are you talking about above ground dams?
Well, you know, of course, some Republicans want dams. I don't think there are too many Democrats who want dams. There may be Democrats, there may be support. I think there is support for raising the level of dams at Shasta, for example.
The environmentalists don't seem to oppose increasing the height of existing dams. I think they oppose building new dams.
Yes. So they'll work this out. They will figure this out, but I don't think they're going to figure it out in 2014.
You know, one of the issues, in addition to do we build dams, is who pays for them.
Right.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so the State Water Project, my understanding is that the split was basically 97%, 3%. 3% came out of the general fund. The vast majority of that money was paid by the users downstream. Now they're talking about a split that might be 50%, 33%. 33% to 50% that you and I would pay, and the users would pay. The direct beneficiaries.
Where's the remaining 17%? Where's that? Where would that be
well,
coming from?
The question is whether the public will pay 33% or 50%.
Oh, I see.
Somewhere along those lines.
Wow, that's a dramatic increase from
it would be. It would be. But then the argument would be that there is public benefit in some of the environmental
recreation, flood control.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you're looking at all these bond proposals. Do you get a sense of which one seems to best address the short and long-term water needs of California?
No, I don't. I mean, you know, I think that certainly the 2009 proposal. This is one that the Senate President Pro Tem, Darrell Steinberg, wants to see on the ballot in a modified version. He views that as, I think, part of his legacy because he helped craft it. But it's too big. Nobody thinks that it can pass. I don't even think Steinberg thinks that voters would approve it. Well, so they've got to pare it down, and then the question is what gets lost.
Well, the question is if they pare it down, they've also got to pass by a 2/3 vote in both the Senate and the Assembly. Are there enough votes there to do that?
Well, no. I just don't see it. Not in 2014. Maybe in 2016. Maybe in 2016. Now, of course, I could be wrong. The drought could worsen. I mean, as we talk, there's a little bit of rain this weekend.
So watch the weather.
Well, watch the weather, but you know, this storm is it's cute. The amount of rain is cute. It's not enough to fix this drought.
It's not game changing.
It is not game changing.
Let me ask this last question. We've only got about 30 seconds left in the segment, and that is the governor is also talking about the Twin Tunnels project, and that's a $25 billion price tag. And we're talking about a water bond that could be anywhere from $6 to $11 billion. Right. That's going to be an awful lot for the voters to swallow. Can they swallow that?
That's the issue. I mean, this is a governor who wants to pay down the debt. How can he do that when he's talking about a $10 billion water bond, a $25 billion tunnel project? We won't even get into high-speed rail and its cost.
Well, I want to thank Dan Morain from the Sacramento Bee for joining us, as well as Janine Jones from the California Department of Water Resources, Jonas Mitten from the Planning and Conservation League, and UC Davis professor Robert Howitt for joining us, all of them for joining us. If you want to stay current on state and local politics, you can sign up for our award-winning and free e-newsletter, the Maddy Daily, just by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.
And now, another perspective.
My name is Sarge Green, and I am a water scientist with the California Water Institute at Fresno State. We are operating on a 20th century water management system with 21st century demands that cannot all be met. The largest challenge for the system is the lack of the ability to link and operate the many different parts together to meet the new complex demands. A state water action plan is an effort to map the full scope of the future actions needed to manage water for all uses efficiently. Some are short-term actions, others are more long-term. California's water users will be asked to finance some of the long-term investments sooner rather than later, and the action plan gives them the big picture so they understand why those investments are needed. We have postponed many investments for too long. Some of our systems are on the verge of failure. Pipes, dams, levees, and the natural water environment are all begging for attention at the same time. Compared to other necessities, water is still relatively inexpensive, but it will get more costly. A state water action plan implemented successfully can help us manage those future costs by making the right investments at the right time. This is Sarge Green for the Maddy Report.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy.
This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.